Prologue, The Silent Weekend, December 27, 2025, 10:47 p.m. Gelsenkirchen, Germany. While families across Germany slept peacefully in their homes, digesting Christmas feasts and dreaming of the year ahead, four masked figures moved with practiced precision through the underground parking garage of a nondescript Sparkasse Bank branch in the Buhr district. Their vehicle, a black Audi RS6 with stolen license plates from Hanover over 200 kilometers away, sat parked in the shadows, its engine ticking quietly as it cooled. The men wore branded athletic clothing, Nike, Adidas, and brightly colored gloves that would later puzzle investigators. Why would professional thieves wear such distinctive clothing? Were they supremely confident, deliberately taunting authorities, or was there a method to this apparent madness? Each carried heavy equipment, industrial drilling machinery, jerry cans filled with water, hoses, pumps, and bags containing tools that couldn't be purchased at any ordinary hardware store. The lead figure consulted architectural plans on a tablet, plans that showed every detail of the bank's underground layout, every security measure, every vulnerability. They knew exactly where they were going. They knew the bank had been closed since Christmas Eve and wouldn't reopen until after the holidays. They knew that 3,300 safe deposit boxes sat in a vault behind a 40 to 45 centimeter reinforced concrete wall. And they knew that these boxes contained not the modest savings of ordinary Germans, but the accumulated wealth of the city's Turkish and Arab immigrant community. Gold jewelry passed down through generations, cash savings from years of hard work, precious family heirlooms that couldn't be replaced at any price. What they were about to attempt would become the largest bank heist in modern German history. A crime so audacious and professionally executed that police would compare it to Hollywood films. The investigation would span weeks, involve hundreds of officers, and ultimately raise disturbing questions about how such a spectacular crime could occur undetected in one of Europe's most orderly and law-abiding nations. This is the story of the Gelsenkirchen heist, a real-life Ocean S11 that unfolded over the Christmas holidays of 2025, stunning a nation and leaving thousands of victims devastated. It's a story still unfolding as investigators race to identify the perpetrators who remain, as of this writing in early January 2026, at large with what may be over 100 million euros in stolen valuables. Chapter 1. Gelsenkirchen and the Sparkasse. To understand this heist, one must first understand Gelsenkirchen. Located in North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany's most populous state, Gelsenkirchen sits in the heart of the Ruhr industrial region, about 30 kilometers north of Dortmund and 270 kilometers northwest of Frankfurt. With a population of approximately 260,000, Gelsenkirchen had long been defined by coal mining and steel production. The city reached its peak population of over 340,000 in the 1960s when the Ruhr region was Germany's industrial powerhouse. But as coal mines closed throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Gelsenkirchen experienced economic decline and population loss that persisted for decades. By 2025, Gelsenkirchen had one of the highest unemployment rates in Germany and was known for economic challenges rather than prosperity. The city's one point of pride was FC Schalke 04, the beloved football club, whose Veltins Arena stadium dominated the city's skyline. But even Schalke had struggled in recent years, relegated from the Bundesliga and facing financial difficulties that mirrored the city's broader challenges. Buhr, the district where the robbery occurred, was historically more affluent than Gelsenkirchen's industrial core. Located in the city's north, Buhr had once been an independent town before being incorporated into Gelsenkirchen in 1928. Its historic market square and relatively well-preserved architecture gave it a character distinct from the heavily industrial southern districts. Critically for this story, Gelsenkirchen had become home to substantial immigrant communities, particularly from Turkey. Turkish Gastarbeiter, guest workers, had begun arriving in Germany in the 1960s to work in the coal mines and steel mills. Many stayed, raised families, and created thriving communities. By 2025, Gelsenkirchen had one of Germany's largest Turkish origin populations, along with significant Arab immigrant communities. These communities maintained cultural connections to their countries of origin, including traditions around wealth and security. In many Middle Eastern and Turkish cultures, Gold jewelry represented not just adornment but portable wealth savings that could be worn, displayed and quickly liquidated if necessary. Bank safe deposit boxes offered what seemed like the perfect solution. Secure storage for valuable gold in a country known for stability and the rule of law. This cultural context would prove crucial to understanding both why the Sparkasse branch held such enormous wealth and why the heist devastated so many victims in ways that transcended mere financial loss.
Sparkasse. Germany's savings bank system, the target of the heist, was a branch of Sparkasse Gelsenkirchen, part of Germany's unique public savings bank system. Understanding Sparkasse is essential to comprehending both why the branch was targeted and why the aftermath was so complex. Sparkasse institutions are public savings banks owned by local governments or public associations. They operate under a different philosophy than private commercial banks, with mandates to serve the public interest rather than maximize shareholder profits. Each Sparkasse is independently operated and locally focused, though they share common branding and cooperative support systems. There are approximately 370 independent Sparkasse institutions across Germany, making them ubiquitous in German life. For many Germans, particularly older citizens and those in smaller towns, Sparkasse is their only bank. The institutions enjoy extremely high trust. Historically, they've been seen as safer than private banks because of their public ownership and conservative lending practices. Sparkasse Gelsenkirchen specifically operated multiple branches throughout the city, serving both ordinary German citizens and the substantial immigrant communities. The Buer branch opened in a modernized building in the early 2000s, offered the full range of banking services, including safe deposit boxes. Safe deposit boxes at Sparkasse branches were popular with immigrants for several reasons. The public ownership structure reassured customers who might distrust private financial institutions. The physical security of bank vaults seemed superior to home storage. And the Sparkasse system's long history, many institutions dated back over a century, suggested stability that transcended individual governments or economic cycles. The Buer branch had 3,300 safe deposit boxes of various sizes, rented to approximately 2,700 customers. The boxes' contents were insured up to €10,300 per box through Sparkasse's standard insurance policy, some that seemed adequate for typical contents like important documents, modest jewelry, or small amounts of emergency cash. What bank management apparently didn't fully grasp was that many immigrant customers were using their safe deposit boxes not for modest valuables, but for substantial wealth storage. Gold jewelry worth tens of thousands of euros, cash savings accumulated over decades. Family heirlooms of immense sentimental value. All of this sat behind what the thieves would prove was inadequate security. The irony was bitter. Customers had chosen Sparkasse Gelsenkirchen specifically because they believed it was the safest place to store their valuables. They had paid annual rental fees for their boxes. They had followed all proper procedures. And on Christmas weekend 2025, professional thieves would validate their worst fears about security, while simultaneously demonstrating that even in orderly law-abiding Germany, determined criminals could execute spectacular crimes with relative impunity. The vault, the stolen wealth, was stored in an underground vault beneath the Sparkasse branch. This vault was connected to a multi-story parking garage that served both the bank and adjacent businesses, detail that would prove catastrophically important. The vault itself was behind security doors and, critically, separated from the parking garage by a reinforced concrete wall 40 to 45 centimeters thick. This wall contained steel rebar reinforcement, making it resistant to ordinary tools. It was designed to protect against opportunistic break-ins, smash and grab robberies, or amateur thieves with basic equipment. What it was not designed to resist was a professional crew with industrial drilling equipment, detailed architectural knowledge, and unlimited time to work undisturbed. The safe deposit boxes within the vault were arrayed along walls in various sizes. Customers accessed their boxes through the bank during business hours, supervised by bank employees who used dual key systems, one key held by the bank, one by the customer, to ensure security. The system had worked reliably for decades. Security measures included alarm systems, video surveillance cameras in common areas, though notably not in the vault basement itself, and the physical security of the vault walls. During business hours, bank employees provided an additional layer of security simply through their presence. After hours, the alarm systems and physical barriers were supposed to suffice. These security measures were adequate against typical threats: break-ins through doors or windows, robberies during business hours, insider theft by individual employees. They were not adequate against what was coming. The targets, who were the 2,700 customers whose safe deposit boxes were rented at the Sparkasse branch. According to victim accounts and police statements, approximately 95% were of Turkish or Arab origin. Only a handful were ethnic Germans, and these mostly in the 5% of boxes that, for reasons still unclear, the thieves left untouched. This demographic profile wasn't accidental. It reflected both Gelsenkirchen's population composition and cultural patterns in wealth storage. For many in the Turkish and Arab communities, safe deposit boxes served functions they might not serve for typical German customers. Consider Onur Meat, one of the victims who spoke publicly after the heist. Meat used his safe deposit box to store gold and valuables he had accumulated over years of work. This wasn't frivolous wealth, but saving it, retirement security, his children's inheritance, the accumulated product of decades of labor. He had specifically chosen Sparkasse because of its public ownership and reputation for security. Or consider the woman who told journalists that her box contained her late mother's gold coin from 1988 and grandmother's gold bracelets intended for her daughter's future. These weren't just valuable objects, they were The concentration of wealth from immigrant communities in the Sparkasse Gelsenkirchen branch would later fuel These questions would haunt the investigation and add an ugly dimension to an already traumatic crime.
Chapter 2. Planning the Perfect Crime Architectural Intelligence. Heists of this sophistication don't happen spontaneously. The Gelsenkirchen robbery required months, perhaps years of planning. Someone had to obtain detailed information about the bank's layout, security systems, and operational patterns. The most basic requirement was architectural plans. The thieves needed to know exactly where the vault was located relative to the parking garage, how thick the wall was, what materials it contained, and where they could drill without hitting structural elements that might cause the building to be unsafe or create noise that would draw attention. Where did these plans come from? Several possibilities existed, none comforting. Inside help. The most obvious source was someone with legitimate access to bank records, a current or former employee, a contractor who had worked on the building, or someone in the architect's office that designed or renovated the branch. A disgruntled former employee might provide such information for payment or revenge. A contractor who observed security weaknesses during renovation work might sell information to criminals. An architect's office employee might not even realize that the building plans they carelessly left accessible could enable a major crime. Public records. In Germany, certain building information was matters of public record, accessible through municipal offices for legitimate purposes like construction planning or historical research. A patient researcher could potentially compile significant information about a building structure from public sources, though critical security details were typically kept confidential. Social engineering. Perhaps someone posed as a contractor, insurance inspector, or other legitimate professional to gain access to the building and photograph or document key details. Social engineering attacks. Manipulating people into providing information they shouldn't had become increasingly sophisticated. Surveillance and reconnaissance. The thieves might have conducted their own surveillance, observing the building over extended periods, photographing the exterior from multiple angles, measuring dimensions, and deducing structural details from observation. Modern drones could photograph building exteriors in detail from angles that revealed architectural features. Whatever the source, the thieves clearly had comprehensive knowledge. They knew exactly where to drill. They knew the wall's thickness to within centimeters. They knew which direction to drill to reach the vault, rather than hitting a utility closet or stairwell. This level of precision didn't come from luck or guesswork. Equipment acquisition. The tools required for this heist weren't available at ordinary hardware stores. The thieves needed industrial-grade equipment specifically designed for drilling through reinforced concrete. The primary tool was a core drilling machine, a specialized device that used diamond-impregnated bits to bore through concrete. These weren't ordinary concrete drill bits sold at home improvement stores. They were professional tools typically used by construction companies for creating openings in existing concrete structures for new pipes, conduits, or ventilation. A core drill capable of boring through 45 centimeters of reinforced concrete would weigh approximately 20 kilograms and cost several thousand euros. The diamond-coated bits themselves cost hundreds or thousands of euros each and would need to be replaced or resharpened after extensive use. As one police spokesman noted, "You can't buy that kind of drill at a hardware store." Professional suppliers would require business licenses and might keep records of purchases. The thieves would have needed to either purchase equipment through legitimate front businesses, buy used equipment from construction companies, or steal the tools from construction sites. The drilling process also required extensive supporting equipment. Diamond core drilling generates tremendous heat. The friction of the diamond bit grinding through concrete and steel rebar creates temperatures that can damage the bit and reduce drilling efficiency. Professional operators use water cooling systems, jerry cans, or Tanks filled with water, connected through hoses to pumps that spray water onto the bit during drilling. The thieves brought all of this. Witnesses reported seeing men carrying large bags and equipment in the parking garage stairwell Saturday night. These weren't small duffel bags. They were the kind of heavy equipment containers that construction crews use. They also needed power. Industrial drilling machines require substantial electrical current, more than ordinary wall outlets could provide. This meant either using the parking garage's electrical system, which would show up on utility records, and might have circuit breakers that would trip from the load, or bringing portable generators, which would have been loud and risky. Forensic examination of the crime scene would later reveal exactly how the thieves powered their equipment, but the planning required was considerable. They needed to ensure adequate power supply for potentially days of drilling operations without triggering alarms or drawing attention through unusual electrical consumption. Finally, they needed tools for opening the safe deposit boxes themselves. Once through the vault wall, they faced 3,000 individual boxes, each with its own lock mechanism. They used some combination of power tools, crowbars, and possibly lock-picking equipment to force open 95% of the boxes in what investigators estimated was 46+ hours inside the vault. Timing and opportunity, the Christmas holiday period offered the perfect window for this crime. Understanding German business culture and holiday traditions helps explain why. Christmas is perhaps Germany's most important holiday, celebrated with an intensity and duration that Americans might find surprising. Christmas Eve, Heilige Abend, is the main celebration, with families gathering for traditional meals and gift exchanges. Most businesses close by early afternoon on December 24th and don't reopen until December 27th at the earliest. The period between Christmas and New Year's is called the Zeit zwischen den Jahren, time between the years, a liminal period when normal routines are suspended. Many Germans take vacation days during this period, extending their Christmas break through New Year's and sometimes into early January. Offices are understaffed, shops have limited hours, and there's a general sense that serious business can wait until the new year properly begins. For the Sparkasse branch, this meant closure from December 24th through December 26th, Boxing Day, also a public holiday in Germany, reopening briefly on December 27th, and potentially closing again for the weekend. The thieves apparently struck over the weekend of December 27th to 28th, when the bank was definitely closed and many of its employees were still on vacation. This timing gave them enormous advantages. The building was empty. Neighbors and nearby businesses were closed or operating skeleton crews. Anyone who heard unusual noises might assume it was late-night maintenance or construction work, not uncommon during holiday closures when buildings could be serviced without disturbing daily operations. The fire alarm that eventually alerted authorities didn't trigger until 3:58 a.m. on Monday, December 29th, likely when the thieves were already gone or in the final stages of their escape. But even if it had triggered earlier, response times might have been slower during the holiday period when emergency services were handling New Year's celebrations and winter weather incidents. The thieves had essentially found a multi-day window when they could work undisturbed in a closed building, knowing that any sounds or activities would attract minimal attention, and that even if discovered, the chaos of the holiday period might delay effective response. Chapter 3. The execution Friday night. Infiltration. The exact timeline remains unclear as investigations continue, but police believe the crime began Friday night or early Saturday morning, December 27th. The bank had reopened briefly on December 27th, but closed in the afternoon, and the parking garage remained accessible 24 hours as it served multiple businesses. The thieves likely arrived in two vehicles, the black Audi RS6 that would later be captured on security cameras leaving the scene, and possibly a white van that some witnesses reported. The Audi's license plates had been stolen weeks earlier in Hanover, over 200 kilometers away, a detail revealing sophisticated pre-planning. They entered the parking garage normally, like any ordinary users. The garage had security cameras, but there were blind spots and areas with limited coverage. The thieves had studied the camera placements. They wore masks, gloves, and branded athletic clothing. The clothing choices puzzled investigators. Why wear distinctive Nike and Adidas gear with visible logos? Most criminals would choose nondescript dark clothing that wouldn't be memorable. One theory suggested by security experts was that the branded clothing might actually aid their escape. If witnesses described seeing men in Nike tracksuits, that description fit thousands of people across Germany. The clothing was memorable, but also generic. Anyone could buy such items at any sporting goods store. It was simultaneously distinctive and anonymous, a peculiar form of camouflage that might confuse rather than clarify witness descriptions. The colorful gloves were even more puzzling. Standard practice for criminals was black gloves that would be least visible and draw minimal attention. Bright-colored gloves seemed almost deliberately attention-grabbing. Were the thieves supremely confident? Were they taunting authorities? Or did the gloves serve some functional purpose? Perhaps different colors identified different team members in the low-light conditions of the vault? Moving through the parking garage to the identified drilling location, they unloaded equipment. This took multiple trips. The drilling machine alone weighed 20 kilograms. Water containers, hoses, pumps, tools, bags for stolen goods. Possibly a portable toilet, more on that shortly. And provisions for a multi-day operation. All of this had to be moved from vehicles to the drilling site. Witnesses reported seeing several men, at least 4, possibly more, carrying large bags in the parking garage stairwell during Saturday night. These witnesses apparently thought nothing of it at the time. People often moved items using parking garages during off hours when elevators were available and there was no foot traffic to navigate around. The thieves identified the precise location on the parking garage wall that corresponded to the vault on the other side. This required exact knowledge of the building's layout. A mistake of even a meter might mean drilling into a utility room, office space, or building structure rather than the vault. Such a mistake could trigger alarms, cause structural damage, or simply mean the entire operation failed after hours of work. They marked the drilling location and began their preparations for what would be an extraordinary feat of criminal engineering. Sunday, the drilling through 40 to 45 centimeters of reinforced concrete is not a quick process. Despite using industrial, diamond core drilling equipment, creating a hole large enough for a person to crawl through would take hours. Experts estimated 2 to 4 hours of actual drilling time per hole. But the thieves apparently created 2 holes, drilling them in overlapping patterns so they could remove a large section of the concrete wall. This technique, used by professional construction contractors when creating large openings, would have taken anywhere from 4 to 8 hours of drilling. The drilling process was anything but quiet. Diamond core drills cutting through reinforced concrete generate noise levels around 100 decibels, roughly equivalent to a motorcycle or nightclub. As victim Sihat Erdem, Bostanchi later noted, to drill through a reinforced concrete wall like this takes at least 2 hours. It requires industrial drilling machines, hundreds of liters of water, and electricity, and it creates noise of around 100 decibels. How did no one hear this? Several factors worked in the thieves' favor. Location. The drilling occurred in the underground levels where sound wouldn't carry to street level or nearby buildings as readily as it would have on upper floors. Timing. They drilled during nighttime hours, particularly Saturday night going into Sunday morning when even businesses that might have security guards or maintenance staff would be closed. Holiday period. The surrounding area was largely deserted during Christmas holidays when many businesses were closed and residents were away visiting family. German construction norms. Germans are relatively accustomed to construction noise, even at odd hours. Major cities often have 24-hour construction projects, and building renovations during holiday closures aren't unusual. Anyone who heard drilling noises might assume it was legitimate construction work. Parking garage acoustics. Multi-story parking garages have unusual acoustic properties. Concrete surfaces reflect and distort sounds in ways that can make it difficult to determine sound sources or directions. Drilling in one corner of a parking garage might not be clearly audible in other areas. Despite these factors, it remains somewhat remarkable that no one apparently called police about suspicious nighttime drilling. This suggests either that people did hear noises but dismissed them, that the thieves had methods of dampening the sound, or that the building's isolation was even more complete than it appeared. The drilling process itself required constant attention. The operators would need to monitor the drill's progress and adjust pressure and speed, maintain steady water flow to cool the bit, Clear away debris that accumulated from the drilling, switch out or resharpen diamond bits as they wore down. Take breaks to avoid equipment overheating. Watch for signs they were hitting rebar reinforcement. Ensure electrical power remained steady. This wasn't work that could be left unattended or rushed. It required skill, patience, and constant supervision. The precision of the final holes suggested experienced operators who had used such equipment before, likely in legitimate construction work. As the holes progressed through the wall, the thieves would have been able to see when they were nearing breakthrough. The drill bit would suddenly meet less resistance as it punched through the final layer of concrete into the void of the vault beyond. At this point, they would have carefully removed the cores of drilled concrete and enlarged the openings until they had created an access hole large enough to crawl through. The actual wall section they removed was substantial enough that a person could step through carrying large bags. Photos later released by police showed a gaping hole with the reinforced concrete core lying amid debris on the vault floor, a testament to the scale of the operation. Inside the vault, the methodical plunder once through the wall. The thieves faced 3,300 safe deposit boxes of varying sizes arrayed along the vault walls. They would spend approximately 46 hours inside, from Saturday morning afternoon through early Monday morning, systematically looting 95% of these boxes. The safe deposit boxes came in different sizes, rented at different annual rates. Smaller boxes might contain documents, modest jewelry, or small amounts of cash. Larger boxes could hold substantial gold jewelry collections, large cash reserves, or bulkier valuables. The thieves apparently worked through the boxes methodically, rather than trying to guess which contained the most value. Opening 3,000 plus locked boxes in 46 hours meant opening an average of one box every minute, though in reality some boxes would open more quickly while others required more effort. The thieves used a combination of power tools, angle grinders, reciprocating saws, or specialized lock drilling equipment to cut through lock mechanisms or hinges. Crowbars and pry bars, physical leverage to force boxes open once locks were compromised. Lock picking. For some older or simpler lock mechanisms, traditional lock picking might have been faster than destructive entry. Each opened box presented a decision: take the contents or not. The thieves apparently took almost everything: cash, gold jewelry, documents, family heirlooms, whatever they found. They had brought large bags, possibly duffel bags or construction-grade trash bags, to carry away the loot. The sheer volume of what they stole was staggering. 3,000 boxes worth of contents, even if individually modest, added up to an enormous quantity of material. Gold jewelry alone would weigh many kilograms. Cash from thousands of boxes would be bulky even in large denominations. Add in other valuables and the thieves were potentially moving dozens of kilograms of loot. This physical challenge, moving that much material from the vault, through the hole in the wall, through the parking garage, and into vehicles, required multiple trips and careful organization. They had to avoid leaving items behind that might later help identify them through DNA evidence or fingerprints. Which brings us to one of the investigation's more unusual revelations: the possibility that the thieves brought their own portable toilet. The portable toilet theory, one detail that emerged from police investigation and expert analysis, was both mundane and revealing. During their 46-plus hours inside the vault, the thieves would have needed to use toilet facilities. But using the building's toilets would risk leaving DNA evidence, hair, skin cells, or biological traces that could later identify them. The solution, investigators theorized, was that the thieves brought a portable chemical toilet, similar to those used at construction sites or outdoor events. They could use this throughout their time in the vault and take it with them when they left, ensuring no biological evidence remained behind. This detail, if true, illustrated the operation's sophistication. The thieves had thought through every aspect of the crime, including mundane biological necessities. They weren't just technically skilled. They were forensically aware, taking steps to avoid leaving evidence that could later identify them. The theory gained additional credibility from another detail. Police reported that the thieves had sprayed the vault with an unknown chemical, apparently to destroy DNA traces. Combined with the portable toilet theory, this suggested criminals who understood forensic investigation techniques and took active measures to counteract them. The chemical treatment, the use of chemicals to destroy DNA evidence, was particularly concerning to investigators.
Various commercial products exist that claim to degrade DNA or make forensic analysis more difficult.
Some are marketed for legitimate purposes like crime scene cleanup or biohazard remediation. Others are sold on black markets specifically to help criminals avoid detection. The chemical treatment, the use of chemicals to destroy DNA evidence, was particularly concerning to investigators. Various commercial products exist that claim to degrade DNA or make forensic analysis more difficult. Some are marketed for legitimate purposes like crime scene cleanup or biohazard remediation.
Others are sold on black markets specifically to help criminals avoid detection.
The exact chemical used in the Gelsenkirchen vault remained unknown weeks after the crime,
with hazmat teams needing to complete cleanup before investigators could fully process the scene.
The fumes were reportedly toxic enough that workers required protective equipment and could only work in short shifts. This created an additional problem for the investigation. The chemical treatment meant that even if the thieves had made mistakes and left DNA evidence, it might be too degraded to analyze effectively. The very thoroughness that made the heist so professionally executed also made the investigation exponentially more difficult. Monday morning, the escape. The fire alarm that alerted authorities triggered at 3:58 a.m. on Monday, December 29th. Police and fire services responded within minutes, discovering the hole in the vault wall and the scope of the robbery.
But the thieves were gone, likely having departed hours earlier. Security camera footage showed the black Audi RS6 leaving the parking garage during the early morning hours of Monday. The vehicle had masked occupants, though police were careful about releasing how many individuals were visible in the footage.
The timing suggested careful planning even in the escape phase. By leaving several hours before the fire alarm triggered, they gave themselves a head start before authorities were alerted.
By departing during very early morning hours, perhaps 1 to 3 a.m., they minimized the chance of witnesses on surrounding streets who might have noted the vehicle's direction. The use of a white van, if confirmed, suggested that the thieves might have used two vehicles in their escape.
Perhaps one to carry stolen goods and one as a clean getaway vehicle that could be used normally if stopped by police. The Audi with its stolen plates would be abandoned or hidden, while the van with legitimate registration might blend into ordinary traffic. Police would later release camera footage showing the Audi and individuals entering and exiting, but by that time the thieves had a multi-day head start. The vehicle would eventually be found or its whereabouts traced, but that would only tell investigators where the thieves had gone immediately after the crime,
not where they were hiding weeks later with their enormous haul of stolen goods.
Chapter 4. Discovery and Aftermath. Monday morning. What have they done? When police officers and firefighters arrived at the Sparkasse branch at approximately 4 a.m. on Monday, December 29th, they initially might not have grasped the full scale of what they were confronting. A bank alarm had gone off that could mean many things, from a false alarm to a minor break-in to something more serious. Walking down to the underground vault level, they found the massive hole drilled through the concrete wall. The scale of the opening immediately signaled that this wasn't a typical break-in. This was professional, elaborate, and unprecedented in recent German history. Inside the vault, the scene was apocalyptic from a banking perspective. 3,000 safe deposit boxes, nearly all forced open, their contents ransacked and mostly gone.
Debris from the drilling covered the floor.
The
toxic chemical smell that would later require hazmat procedures was already apparent.
The concrete core that had been drilled out lay amid the chaos like evidence of a disaster. The officers immediately secured the scene and called for additional resources. This was clearly going to be a major investigation requiring forensic specialists, technical experts, and extensive documentation. Every inch of the crime scene would need to be photographed, measured, analyzed, and processed for potential evidence.
Bank officials were notified. For Sparkasse Gelsenkirchen's management, the call must have been nightmarish.
Their institution, trusted by thousands of customers, had experienced a catastrophic security failure. Thousands of safe deposit boxes had been looted. The contents insured at an average of €10,300 per box, but potentially worth far more represented an enormous financial and reputational liability.
The bank's immediate challenge was figuring out which customers had been affected and what procedures to follow. With 3,300 boxes potentially compromised, contacting customers individually would be an enormous administrative task. They set up a dedicated hotline for affected customers and began the process of notifying everyone with safe deposit boxes at the Boer branch. The community response within the Turkish and Arab communities in Gelsenkirchen and surrounding cities. The heist quickly became a major topic of conversation. WhatsApp groups and community Facebook pages exploded with discussions, theories, and organizing efforts. Victims began coordinating through an online platform, sharing information about their losses and strategizing about how to press their claims. The scale of coordination was itself revealing, as Neat noted. There's an online platform with 195 members, and we're estimating losses of 100 million euros. And that doesn't include everyone yet. The 100 million euros figure was extraordinary. Even if each of the 2,850 looted boxes contained an average of euro 35,000, itself a staggering sum that would reach the 100 million euros estimate. But victims insisted this wasn't exaggeration. Many boxes contained 50,000 euros to 100,000 or more in gold jewelry and cash. Some might have held even more. The demographic concentration of victims raised uncomfortable questions. Why were 95% of the looted boxes rented by Turkish and Arab customers? The 5% that were left untouched belonged primarily to ethnic Germans. Was this coincidence, or had the thieves deliberately targeted specific boxes? Several theories emerged in community discussions. Targeted selection. Perhaps the thieves had inside information about which boxes contained the most valuable contents and specifically targeted boxes belonging to immigrant customers who were known to store gold and cash. Inside job. The targeting was so precise that some victims suspected bank employees or others with access to customer information had provided intelligence to the thieves. Ethnic profiling. In a darker interpretation, perhaps the thieves specifically targeted immigrant communities out of prejudice, seeing them as vulnerable or less likely to have recourse. Random distribution. Skeptics argued that the 95/5 split might simply reflect the customer base. If 95% of safe deposit box customers at that branch were from immigrant communities, then 95% of looted boxes would naturally belong to those communities. Police initially seemed to favor the latter explanation, suggesting the demographic concentration simply reflected the customer base. But victims found this unconvincing. If the selection was random, why were any boxes left untouched? The fact that virtually all untouched boxes belonged to German customers seems suspiciously non-random. Some community leaders spoke of a broader betrayal. They had come to Germany seeking opportunity and security. They had worked hard, saved diligently, and trusted German institutions to protect what they had earned. The heist seemed to validate fears that immigrants would never truly be safe in their adopted country, that even Germany's famed order and rule of law couldn't protect them. Others focused more pragmatically on compensation and recovery. Lawyers began reaching out to victims, offering to represent them in claims against the bank and its insurers. Class action lawsuits were discussed. Politicians were lobbied to intervene on victims' behalf. The bank's closure of the Boer branch ostensibly for security reasons, but also possibly due to threats against employees further inflamed tensions. Victims needed access to documentation about their safe deposit box contracts, rental histories, and any records the bank maintained about visits or access. With the branch closed, obtaining this information became difficult, complicating insurance claims. Media sensation. As word of the heist spread beyond Gelsenkirchen, the story became a media sensation both nationally and internationally. The scale of the theft, the sophisticated methodology, and the holiday timing all captured public imagination. German media initially focused on the technical aspects. How could thieves drill through a concrete wall in a public building without being detected? Security experts were interviewed, discussing drilling techniques, acoustic properties of concrete, and vulnerabilities in bank security systems. International media picked up the story with headlines comparing it to famous heist films. Real-life Ocean's 11, Germany's bank heist of the century, the Crristmas vault job, the professional execution, and
audacious scope made the crime seem almost cinematic, though victims found nothing entertaining about their losses. Turkish and Arab media covered the story extensively, often with emphasis on the ethnic dimension of the victims. Reports in Turkish. Newspapers highlighted the concentration of Turkish victims and speculated about whether they had been deliberately targeted. Some reports questioned whether German police would prioritize the investigation, given that most victims were immigrants. True crime YouTube channels and Reddit forums exploded with amateur analysis. Commenters debated theories about who the thieves might be, how they could be caught, and whether the stolen goods could ever be recovered. Some praised the technical sophistication of the heist while condemning the harm to victims. Others focused on security failures, questioning how such a crime could occur in Germany of all places. The bank became a focal point for broader discussions about immigrant wealth, integration, and trust in institutions. Why did immigrant communities rely so heavily on physical gold and cash rather than electronic banking? Some commenters cited cultural traditions and legitimate concerns about financial crises. Others raised more troubling explanations involving tax avoidance or undocumented wealth, though victims and their advocates vigorously disputed such insinuations. Security industry publications analyzed the heist from a technical perspective, discussing concrete drilling techniques, alarm system vulnerabilities, and safe deposit box security. The consensus was that while the execution was impressive, the vulnerability that enabled it, an insufficiently protected concrete wall between a public parking garage and a high-security vault, was a known risk that Sparkasse had failed to adequately address. Chapter 5. The investigation. Gelsenkirchen police. Overwhelmed. The Gelsenkirchen police department found itself managing the largest criminal investigation in the city's recent history. With 2,850 potential crime scenes, each looted safe deposit box represented an individual theft, thousands of victims, and a cold trail from criminals who had departed days before discovery. The investigation quickly exceeded local capacity. North Rhine-Westphalia's State Criminal Police Office, Landeskriminalamt or LKA, took over coordination. The LKA had experience with major organized crime investigations and could draw on statewide resources. Federal authorities also became involved given the high scale and potential connections to organized crime. The initial investigative priorities were crime scene processing. The vault itself needed to be meticulously documented and analyzed. Every surface was photographed. Debris from the drilling was collected for analysis. The hole's dimensions and drilling patterns were measured. Investigators looked for any physical evidence the thieves might have left. Fingerprints, DNA, tool marks, anything that could provide leads. Chemical analysis. The unknown chemicals sprayed in the vault had to be identified. Hazmat teams took samples and sent them to laboratories. Understanding what chemical was used might provide leads about where it was purchased or manufactured. Video analysis. Security cameras in the parking garage and surrounding areas had captured footage of the thieves, their vehicles and their movements. Investigators reviewed hours of video, looking for identifying features, behavioral patterns, or mistakes the thieves might have made. Vehicle tracking. The black Audi RS6 with stolen license plates became a key focus. Where were those plates stolen? Had the car been captured on traffic cameras or automatic license plate readers as it traveled to or from Gelsenkirchen? Where was the vehicle now? Financial investigation. Following the money in heists is standard procedure, but this case was complicated by the stolen goods being primarily gold jewelry and cash rather than electronic assets. Still, investigators examined financial records looking for anything unusual: large purchases of drilling equipment, rental of storage units where stolen goods might be hidden, or other expenses that might connect to the crime. Witness interviews. Despite occurring during a holiday period when few people were around, someone might have seen or heard something useful. Investigators canvassed the area, interviewed parking garage users, and appealed to the public for information. Inside job investigation. The sophistication and apparent targeting raised the question of whether someone with insider knowledge had been involved. Investigators began background checks on current and former Sparkasse employees, contractors who had worked on the building, and anyone else with potential access to sensitive information. The forensic challenge processing the crime scene presented unusual challenges. The chemical spraying meant investigators needed protective equipment and could only work in short shifts.
The volume of debris from the drilling pulverized. Concrete, water used in drilling, tool marks, and other traces required careful collection and analysis. One promising lead was the drilling itself.
Industrial diamond core drill bits leave distinctive marks in concrete based on the specific bit type, drill model, and operator technique.
Forensic engineers could potentially identify
the specific equipment model used, which might help trace purchases or rentals. The water system used for cooling during drilling was another potential source of evidence. Professional drilling operations use substantial amounts of water, hundreds of liters.
The thieves either used the building's water system, which would show in utility records, or brought their own water, which would leave
traces and require disposal. Tool marks on forced safe deposit boxes could be analyzed. Different tools leave different signatures. An angle grinder leaves different marks than a reciprocating saw or a crowbar. Investigators catalog the tools used on different boxes, looking for patterns that might indicate how many people were involved or what their tool preferences revealed about their backgrounds. The portable toilet theory, if correct, was both helpful and frustrating. Helpful because it suggested forensically aware criminals who wouldn't make easy mistakes. Frustrating because it meant one potential source of DNA.
Evidence had been removed from the scene. The chemical treatment was perhaps most frustrating. Even if the thieves had made mistakes touch surfaces with ungloved hands, shed hair, left other biological traces, the chemical might have degraded that evidence beyond usability. Weeks after the crime, forensic teams were still determining what, if any, usable biological evidence remained.
Video evidence. 4 masked men. The most concrete evidence came from security cameras. Video footage showed at least 4 masked individuals in the parking garage during the relevant time period. They wore distinctive athletic clothing, Nike and Adidas branded tracksuits, and colorful gloves. They carried heavy bags and equipment. The footage captured their general builds, heights, and movement patterns. Even without seeing faces, forensic video analysts could extract information from how people walked, gestured, and moved. Height could be estimated from comparisons with objects of known size in the video. Build and body type were visible despite
Loose clothing.
behavioral patterns, how they distributed work, who appeared to be giving directions, who handled specific equipment, suggested a hierarchical organization. The black Audi RS6 was clearly visible in footage leaving the parking garage. The stolen license plates from Hanover were noted.
Traffic cameras in Gelsenkirchen captured the vehicle at various points as it departed the area,
allowing investigators to trace its route, at least initially. But the video evidence also revealed the criminals' sophistication. They had clearly studied the camera placements, staying in less covered areas when possible. They wore masks throughout, suggesting they knew cameras were present.
Their clothing, while distinctive, was also generic enough that finding them based on it would be difficult.
The vehicle's direction of travel gave some clues. It headed toward the A2 Autobahn, which connects Gelsenkirchen to both Dortmund to the south and the wider highway network. From the A2, the thieves could have gone virtually anywhere in Germany or even crossed into neighboring countries. The Audi RS6, a dead end. The choice of a black Audi RS6 as a getaway vehicle was interesting. The RS6 is a high-performance luxury car, expensive, fast, and relatively uncommon. It can accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in under 4 seconds and reach top speeds over 300 kilometers per hour. As a getaway vehicle for a heist crew that needed to quickly leave the area and potentially evade police pursuit,
it was an excellent choice. But it was also conspicuous.
A black Audi RS6 wasn't a vehicle that blended into ordinary traffic. People noticed such cars. This suggested either supreme confidence or a plan to quickly switch vehicles.
The license plates had been stolen in Hanover weeks before the heist. This advanced planning showed
sophistication. Stealing plates well ahead of time and from a distant city reduced the chance of them being flagged before the crime. But it also created investigative leads. Police in Hanover could review video from the license plate theft, looking for suspects or vehicles. Finding the Audi itself would be a priority. But organized criminals knew that cars could be hidden, destroyed, or disguised. The vehicle might be in a private garage somewhere, completely disassembled in a chop shop, or even burned and abandoned in a remote location. With each passing day, the chance of finding useful evidence from the vehicle decreased. The inside job theory, the sophistication of the crime, the apparent targeting of specific demographics, and the detailed knowledge of the building's layout all suggested possible insider involvement. Investigators pursued several angles. Current employees. Did any current Sparkasse employees have financial problems, gambling debts, or other vulnerabilities that might make them susceptible to corruption? Had any employees accessed safe deposit box customer information without legitimate business reasons? Were there any suspicious patterns in employee schedules or activities around the time of the heist? Former employees. Disgruntled former employees with knowledge of security systems and building layout were obvious suspects. Investigators reviewed personnel records, looking for anyone who had been fired, laid off, or left under difficult circumstances. They checked financial records to see if any former employees had received suspicious payments. Contractors. The building had undergone renovations and maintenance over the years. Contractors would have had access to architectural plans, security systems, and detailed knowledge of the structure. Investigators compiled lists of all companies that had worked on the building and began background checks. Security companies. Firms that installed or maintained security systems would have detailed knowledge of alarm placements, camera positions, and potential vulnerabilities. While such companies were typically carefully vetted and employees thoroughly backgrounded, the possibility of a corrupt employee couldn't be ignored. Architectural firms. The original building designers and any firms involved in subsequent renovations would have had complete architectural plans. While access to such plans was supposed to be tightly controlled, investigators knew that determined criminals could sometimes obtain such information through social engineering, bribery, or theft. This aspect of the investigation was particularly sensitive. If bank employees or contractors were involved, it could expose Sparkasse to even greater liability. It would also mean that security vulnerabilities were more widespread than just the inadequately protected concrete wall. Human vulnerabilities in information security were equally problematic. As of early January 2026, police had not publicly announced any arrests or identified specific suspects in connection with potential insider involvement. This could mean they had found no evidence of inside help, or it could mean investigations were ongoing, but hadn't yet reached the point where arrests or public announcements were appropriate. The gold trail, perhaps the biggest investigative challenge, was tracing the stolen goods. Unlike bank robbery, where thieves steal cash that can be tracked through serial numbers, or electronic theft where transactions leave digital trails, this heist involved primarily gold jewelry and physical cash that were inherently difficult to trace. Gold jewelry poses unique challenges for recovery. It can be melted down, destroying any identifying characteristics, and sold as raw gold. Even without melting, jewelry can be sold through informal networks, pawn shops, or defense operations that don't ask questions about provenance. Investigators issued alerts to gold buyers, pawn shops, and jewelry dealers throughout Germany and neighboring countries. The sheer volume of gold that would potentially enter the market, possibly hundreds of kilograms, might create detectable patterns. A sudden surge in gold sales in a particular area, sellers offering gold jewelry in unusual quantities, or patterns suggesting the same gold repeatedly changing hands could all provide leads. But sophisticated fences knew how to avoid such detection. They might hold on to stolen goods for months or years before gradually introducing them to markets. They might move goods across multiple countries, taking advantage of different regulatory environments and less coordinated law enforcement. They might work with organized crime networks that had established channels for moving stolen valuables. The cash presented similar challenges. While large cash deposits might trigger anti-money laundering alerts at banks, criminals knew how to structure transactions to avoid such triggers. They could make many small deposits, use the cash for daily expenses to avoid depositing it at all, or move it through shell companies and complex financial structures. International cooperation was essential. If the thieves were part of organized crime networks with connections across Europe or beyond, They might move stolen goods through multiple countries. German investigators worked with Europol and Interpol to alert law enforcement agencies throughout Europe about the heist and the
Types of goods that might appear in their jurisdictions. The ethnic angle. The concentration of immigrant victims created investigative complications. On one hand, it might provide leads if the thieves had specifically targeted immigrant customers. That suggested inside knowledge of customer demographics and potentially pointed towards specific suspects. On the other hand, it raised questions about community cooperation with police. Would immigrant victims, particularly those from communities that might have complicated relationships with law enforcement, fully cooperate with investigators? Would they accurately report what they had stored in safe deposit boxes, even if some of that wealth had not been reported to tax authorities? Police stressed that the investigation focused on catching the thieves, not investigating victims' financial affairs. Victims were encouraged to fully document their losses for insurance purposes without fear that tax authorities would use that information against them. Whether this reassurance was credible to victims was another question. Community leaders emphasized the importance of cooperation, catching the perpetrators and recovering stolen goods, if that was even possible, required victims to work with authorities. At the same time, they advocated for victims' rights and pushed back against any suggestions that victims bore responsibility for their losses or had somehow invited the crime through their choice to store wealth in safe deposit boxes. Public appeals. Police released selected video footage and images from the crime scene, appealing for public help. They published photos showing the black Audi RS6 leaving the parking garage, individuals in distinctive athletic clothing carrying bags, the drilling equipment, and the massive holes in the vault wall, the scale of destruction inside the vault. The public appeals asked anyone with information to contact a dedicated tip line. Did anyone recognize the individuals from their clothing or mannerisms? Did anyone see the Audi RS6 in unusual locations before or after the heist? Did anyone hear suspicious noises or observe unusual activities around the Sparkasse branch during the Christmas holiday period? Police offered rewards for information leading to arrests or recovery of stolen goods. While the amounts weren't publicly disclosed, such rewards could be substantial for a case of this magnitude. In Germany, rewards sometimes came from both official sources, police budgets or Crime Stoppers programs, and private sources. Insurance companies eager to avoid paying massive claims if goods could be recovered. The public response to appeals was reportedly substantial, with the tip line receiving hundreds of calls. But as with any major case, most tips were unhelpful. People reporting irrelevant information, offering theories, without evidence, or even making false claims, hoping for reward money. Investigators had to carefully evaluate each tip, following up on anything that seemed potentially useful while not being overwhelmed by low-quality information. Chapter 6. Theories and Speculation, the Professional Crew Theory. The most widely accepted theory among investigators was that the heist was carried out by a professional criminal crew with significant experience in similar crimes. Several factors supported this. Technical sophistication. The drilling operation required specialized equipment and skills that suggested construction or engineering backgrounds. These weren't amateurs who had watched YouTube videos about concrete drilling. These were people who had used such equipment professionally, likely for years. Planning depth. The level of advanced planning, obtaining architectural plans, timing the crime for the Christmas holiday period, coordinating a multi-day operation indicated professional criminal experience. This wasn't opportunistic crime, but carefully orchestrated theft. Forensic awareness. The chemical treatment to destroy DNA, the possible use of a portable toilet, the consistent use of masks and gloves, the stolen license plates all indicated awareness of forensic investigation, techniques and active measures to counteract them. Operational discipline. Spending 46+ hours in the vault without apparently major mistakes required discipline, patience, and experience. Amateurs might panic, rush, or make errors that would leave more evidence. If the professional crew theory was correct, several implications followed. First, these individuals might have records previous arrests or convictions for similar crimes in Germany or other countries. Investigators could search databases for people with relevant criminal histories and technical backgrounds. Second,
Professional crews often use similar methods across multiple crimes.
Were there other bank heists in Germany or Europe with similar characteristics, concrete drilling, holiday timing, targeting of safe deposit boxes? Connecting this heist to other crimes could provide valuable leads.
Third, professional criminals often worked within organized crime networks.
They might have connections to fences who could move stolen goods, safe houses where they could hide, and protective networks that would help them evade capture.
Understanding which organized crime groups might be involved could help focus the investigation.
The international organized crime theory, an extension of the professional crew theory, was that the heist might have been carried out by an international organized crime syndicate. Several notorious criminal networks operated across Europe, some with particular
expertise in high-value thefts. Balkan organized crime groups, criminal networks from former Yugoslavia, particularly Serbia and Montenegro, had been implicated in numerous sophisticated heists across Western Europe.
These groups often had military training from wars in the 1990s, engineering expertise,
and established networks for moving stolen goods. Eastern European criminal networks, Polish, Romanian, and other Eastern European criminal groups, had been involved in various high-value thefts. Throughout the EU, they often operated transnationally, carrying out crimes in wealthy Western European countries while maintaining bases in Eastern Europe,
where law enforcement cooperation might be more limited. Middle Eastern criminal networks.
Given that the victims were predominantly from Turkish and Arab communities, some speculated about whether Middle Eastern criminal networks might have been involved. This was controversial. Territory critics warned against ethnic stereotyping, noting that criminals could come from any background. However, investigators had to consider all possibilities.
Dutch-Belgian criminal networks.
The Netherlands and Belgium were home to sophisticated organized crime groups involved in various illegal activities, including high-value theft.
These groups had established routes for moving stolen goods and money, laundering operations that could handle the enormous proceeds from a heist like Gelsenkirchen. If international organized crime was involved, several challenges arose.
Perpetrators might have already left Germany, fled to countries with less effective law enforcement or less cooperation with German authorities.
Stolen goods might have been moved across multiple borders, making recovery nearly impossible.
The network's resources and sophistication might exceed what German police typically dealt with, requiring extensive international cooperation and possibly years to build cases.
Europol would be crucial in such a scenario, coordinating intelligence sharing and potentially organizing joint operations across multiple countries. Interpol could issue red notices, international arrest warrants, for identified suspects.
But actually locating and apprehending criminals who might be anywhere in Europe or beyond would be enormously difficult. The inside job gone wrong theory. A more speculative theory suggested that the heist might have started as an inside job, but evolved in unexpected ways. Perhaps a bank employee or contractor who provided information to criminals didn't fully understand the scale of the planned crime. Or perhaps the thieves had initially targeted only specific high-value boxes but decided to loot
everything once inside the vault. This theory attempted to explain both the sophisticated planning, suggesting inside knowledge, and some seemingly impulsive elements. The apparent lack of selectivity in which boxes were looted,
the chemical treatment that might have been improvised rather than planned. However, most investigators viewed this theory skeptically.
The evidence suggested a well-planned and
methodically executed operation, not something that had improvised or gone wrong.
The drilling alone required days of work. Anyone involved in planning would have known the operation would be extensive.
The copycat theory. Some observers noted similarities between the Gelsenkirchen heist and famous heists from cinema, particularly films like Ocean's 11 or the Italian film The Usual Suspects. Could the perpetrators have been inspired by fictional heists, trying to recreate movie magic in real life? While cinema inspiration wasn't impossible, investigators noted that real-life heists required skills and resources beyond what movies typically depicted.
The drilling operation in Gelsenkirchen wasn't glamorous. It was hot, noisy, physically demanding work that took days.
The planning required detailed technical knowledge, not just watching heist films. More relevant might be similarities to actual historical heists.
The Hatton Garden heist in London in 2015, involved elderly career criminals drilling through a concrete wall to access a vault containing safe deposit boxes. That crime netted approximately £14 million, about 16 million euros, and became one of the UK's largest burglaries. Several perpetrators were eventually caught, convicted, and sentenced to substantial prison terms. The similarities were notable. Both crimes targeted safe deposit boxes in vault rooms. Both involved drilling through concrete walls. Both occurred during holiday periods. Hatton Garden happened over Easter weekend, and both involved professional crews with significant criminal experience. However, Gelsenkirchen appeared even more sophisticated. The Hatton Garden criminals were mostly in their 60s and 70s, career criminals with decades of experience but also physical limitations. The Gelsenkirchen crew appeared younger and more physically capable based on video evidence of them moving heavy equipment. The Hatton Garden heist was eventually solved through a combination of police work and the criminals' own mistakes. Whether Gelsenkirchen would have a similar outcome remained to be seen. The social media theory. One of the more unusual theories circulating on social media suggested that the thieves might have been part of an online community that shared information about vulnerable targets and techniques. In this theory, someone had identified the Sparkasse branch as vulnerable, shared architectural information online, and the heist was carried out by a group formed specifically for this crime through online connections. This theory was largely speculative, drawing on concerns about dark web forums where criminals allegedly shared information. While such forums existed and did sometimes facilitate crimes, orchestrating a heist of this complexity through online-only connections seemed unlikely. The required level of trust, coordination, and skill would be difficult to develop without face-to-face relationships. However, investigators couldn't completely dismiss online elements. Perhaps someone had posted architectural plans online without realizing their significance. Perhaps discussions on construction or engineering forums had inadvertently provided useful information to criminals. Perhaps stolen goods were being fenced through dark web marketplaces. Digital forensics teams examined online forums, social media, and dark websites for any references that might connect to the heist. This was painstaking work with low probability of success, but in a case where physical leads were limited, even unlikely avenues had to be explored. Chapter 7. The victim's plight, the human cost beyond the massive financial losses. The heist inflicted enormous emotional trauma on victims. For many, especially elderly victims, the safe deposit boxes had contained their entire life savings and precious family heirlooms that couldn't be replaced at any price. Sihat Erdem Bostanchi, who had worked in construction for years, expressed the bitter irony that many victims felt. We save for years, turn our money into gold, and store it in banks because we believe it's the safest place. My retirement plan is gone. My children's inheritance is gone. How do I recover from this at my age? The woman who mentioned her mother's 1988 gold coin and grandmother's gold bracelets wasn't just describing financial losses. She was describing the theft of family history, tangible connections to deceased relatives, items that carried emotional significance far exceeding their market value. How do you put a price on your grandmother's bracelet that she wore every day? That was given to me when she passed? That I was going to give to my daughter? She asked reporters, her voice breaking for immigrant families who had accumulated wealth through decades of hard work, often starting from nothing when they arrived in Germany. The losses were particularly devastating. Many had worked in factories, restaurants, or construction, physically demanding jobs that paid modest wages. They had saved diligently, often making significant sacrifices, to build financial security for their families. That security was now gone. The timing occurring during Christmas holidays added another layer of trauma. While many German families were celebrating, immigrant families whose holidays followed different calendars still recognized this as a time when Germany essentially shut down. The thieves had exploited this, but victims experienced the timing as a violation of the social contract, even during holidays when everyone deserved peace. Criminals had been plotting against them. The insurance crisis, the €10,300 insurance coverage per box, quickly emerged as grossly inadequate for most victims. This coverage was based on historical averages and assumptions about typical safe deposit box contents, important documents.
modest jewelry, small amounts of emergency cash.
But many victims, particularly from immigrant communities, had been using their boxes for much more substantial wealth storage. Claims ranged from 50,000 euros to over 100,000 euros per box. Some victims claimed even higher losses: gold jewelry collections passed down through generations, cash savings from decades of work, precious gems and heirlooms of immense value. The bank's position was that the 10,300 euros coverage was standard across the industry and clearly stated in safe deposit box rental agreements. Customers who wanted higher coverage should have obtained additional insurance through homeowners' policies or specialized valuable articles insurance. The bank couldn't be held responsible for losses beyond the contracted coverage amount. Victims countered that the bank had failed in its basic duty to provide adequate security. They had paid annual fees specifically for security services. The bank had presented itself as a safe place to store valuables. The security failure was so complete, allowing thieves to spend 46 hours drilling through walls and looting the vault, that it constituted gross negligence justifying liability beyond standard coverage limits. The legal situation was complex. German law regarding safe deposit box liability had been shaped by various court cases over the years. Generally, banks were required to provide reasonable security but weren't liable for theft unless negligence could be proven. The question was whether the concrete wall between the parking garage and vault, evidently inadequate given how the thieves breached it, constituted such negligence. Insurance companies who would ultimately pay claims had strong incentives to minimize payouts. They could argue that customers who stored more than 10,300 euros worth of valuables should have disclosed this and obtained additional coverage. They could require extensive documentation of losses, purchase receipts, photographs, detailed descriptions that many victims couldn't provide for items purchased decades ago or inherited from relatives. The documentation requirement was particularly frustrating. As Unsolved noted, "They're asking me to provide receipts for my grandmother's jewelry. She's been dead for 30 years. Who keeps receipts for that long? Who could have imagined needing them?" For items with primarily sentimental value, family heirlooms, photographs, documents determining appropriate compensation was nearly impossible. What's the value of your deceased mother's wedding ring? The market value of the gold and any gemstones could be calculated, but the emotional value was literally priceless. The class action movement. By early January 2026, victim coordination had evolved into preliminary discussions of class action lawsuits against Sparkasse Gelsenkirchen and potentially against the city of Gelsenkirchen as the bank's owner. Lawyers specializing in bank liability and insurance litigation were reaching out to victims, offering representation. A class action approach had several advantages for victims. It would pool resources, allowing victims to hire experienced legal counsel they might not afford individually. It would streamline litigation that might otherwise involve thousands of individual cases. It would put pressure on Sparkasse and insurers to settle rather than face years of expensive litigation. The legal claims could include negligence in security, breach of contract, failing to provide the security services that rental fees paid for, and possibly even fraud if it could be shown that the bank knew about security vulnerabilities but didn't disclose them to customers. However, class actions also had disadvantages. Individual victims lost control over their cases, with decisions made by class representatives and lawyers. Settlements might be structured to favor some victims over others. The process could take years, during which victims would be without their money or belongings. Some victims preferred pursuing individual claims. Those with the largest losses and best documentation might recover more through individual litigation than through class action settlements that averaged payouts across all victims. Those with primarily emotional rather than financial losses might prefer individual cases where they could tell their personal stories rather than being subsumed into aggregate statistics. The lawyers organizing class action efforts estimated that litigation could take 3 to 5 years to resolve, possibly longer if appeals reached higher courts. During this time, victims would be in legal limbo, unable to fully rebuild their finances without knowing what they might eventually recover. Community organizing. Beyond legal action, victims were organizing to support each other and advocate for their interests.
The online platform Meet mentioned had grown to include several hundred victims who shared information, coordinated responses to bank requests, and strategized about media engagement. Community leaders and organizations representing Turkish and Arab communities in Gelsenkirchen became involved, advocating for victims and sometimes mediating between victims and authorities. Mosques and cultural centers provided spaces for community meetings where victims could share their experiences and plan collective action. This organizing had political dimensions as well. Local and state politicians were lobbied to intervene on victims' behalf. While government couldn't dictate insurance payouts or legal outcomes, political pressure might encourage faster resolution or more favorable settlements. The ethnic concentration of victims gave the organizing efforts particular character. Shared cultural background and language facilitated communication and coordination. Community networks that existed before the heist, social ties through mosques, cultural associations, and neighborhood connections were leveraged for victim support. However, this ethnic dimension also risked marginalization. Would mainstream German society view this as primarily a problem for immigrant communities rather than a broader crime affecting all residents? Would political support be less enthusiastic because victims were predominantly immigrants? These concerns shaped how victim advocates framed their communications, emphasizing that this was a crime against all Gelsenkirchen residents and a challenge to Germany's reputation for security and rule of law. Psychological impact. The psychological toll on victims extended beyond financial stress to deeper questions of trust and security. Many victims described feelings similar to those experienced by victims of home burglaries: violation, vulnerability, loss of the sense of safety. Mental health professionals noted that victims of this type of crime often experience symptoms similar to post-traumatic stress, intrusive thoughts about the theft, anxiety about financial security, hypervigilance about other potential threats, difficulty sleeping, and persistent feelings of vulnerability. For elderly victims, the psychological impact was often most severe. At ages where financial recovery was unlikely and where accumulated wealth represented their only security, the losses could be devastating. Some elderly victims expressed feelings of hopelessness, wondering how they would maintain their standard of living for their remaining years. The cultural dimensions of trauma were also significant. In cultures where gold jewelry represented not just wealth but family honor and generational continuity, its loss carried particular weight. Items that were supposed to be passed to children and grandchildren, linking past, present, and future, were gone, severing those connections. Some victims reported that family relationships suffered under the stress. Couples argued about financial decisions. Adult children blamed elderly parents for storing so much wealth in one place. The theft's aftermath created conflicts that compounded the original trauma. Support services, counseling, support groups, community assistance programs began organizing to help victims process the psychological impacts, but such services could only do so much. The fundamental problem was that victims had suffered irreplaceable losses, and no amount of counseling could change that reality. Chapter 8. Security failures and lessons: the concrete wall problem. The most obvious security failure was the concrete wall separating the parking garage from the vault. At 40 to 45 centimeters thick with steel reinforcement, it seemed substantial, but it proved inadequate against determined thieves with industrial drilling equipment and unlimited time. Security experts analyzing the heist noted several problems with the wall as a security measure. Accessibility. The wall's location between a public parking garage and the vault meant that anyone with parking access could reach it. Public parking garages by their nature have minimal security. Anyone can enter, park, and move around relatively freely. Time. The thieves had effectively unlimited time to work. During the multi-day Christmas closure, they could drill for hours or days without anyone interrupting them. No security measure that requires time to defeat is adequate if attackers have unlimited time. Technology. Modern drilling technology, particularly diamond core drills, can penetrate even thick reinforced concrete given enough time. While such equipment is expensive and requires skill, the Crristmas vault. Inside Germany's 100 million euros bank heist prologue. The silent weekend, December 27, 2025. 10:47 p.m. Gelsenkirchen, Germany. while families across Germany slept peacefully in their homes, digesting Christmas feasts and dreaming of the year ahead.
4 masked figures moved with practiced precision through the underground parking garage of a nondescript Sparkasse Bank branch in the Buhr district. Their vehicle,
a black Audi RS6 with stolen license plates from Hanover over 200 kilometers away, sat parked in the shadows, its engine ticking quietly as it cooled. The men wore branded athletic clothing, Nike, Adidas, and brightly colored gloves that would later puzzle investigators. Why would professional thieves wear such distinctive clothing?
were they supremely confident, deliberately taunting authorities, or was there a method to this apparent madness?
Each carried heavy equipment, industrial drilling machinery, jerry cans filled with water, hoses, pumps, and bags containing tools that couldn't be purchased at any ordinary hardware store.
The lead figure consulted
Architectural plans on a tablet, plans that showed every detail of the bank's underground layout, every security measure, every vulnerability. They knew exactly where they were going. They knew the bank had been closed since Christmas Eve and wouldn't reopen until after the holidays. They knew that 3,300 safe deposit boxes sat in a
vault behind a 40 to 45 centimeter reinforced concrete wall.
And they knew, somehow they knew, that these boxes contained not the modest savings of ordinary Germans, but the accumulated wealth of the city's Turkish and Arab immigrant community. Gold jewelry passed down through generations, cash savings from years of hard work, precious family heirlooms that couldn't be replaced at any price.
What they were about to attempt would become the largest bank heist in modern German history.
A crime so audacious and professionally executed that police would compare it to Hollywood films. The investigation would span weeks, involve hundreds of officers, and ultimately raise disturbing questions about how such a spectacular crime could occur undetected in one of Europe's most orderly and law-abiding nations.
This is the story of the Gelsenkirchen heist, a real-life Ocean's 11 that unfolded over the Christmas holidays of 2025, stunning a nation and leaving thousands of victims devastated.
It's a story still unfolding as investigators race to identify the perpetrators, who remain, as of this writing in early January 2026, at large with what may be over 100 million euros in stolen valuables. Technology. Modern drilling technology, particularly diamond core drills, can penetrate even thick reinforced concrete given enough time. While such equipment is expensive and requires skill to use, it's readily available to anyone with construction industry connections.
Detection. The wall itself provided no mechanism for detecting drilling attempts.
There were no vibration sensors, no acoustic monitoring, no structural integrity sensors that might alert security when someone began drilling through it. Security consultants who reviewed the case suggested that the vault should have been designed with multiple security layers.
Rather than relying solely on a concrete wall, the bank should have implemented motion sensors
in the parking garage near the vault, vibration sensors on the concrete wall that would trigger alarms if drilling was attempted, acoustic monitoring that could detect the characteristic sounds of industrial drilling, video surveillance focused specifically on the wall area,
and regular security patrols during extended closures.
None of these measures alone would have prevented the heist, but together they might have detected it in progress, allowing police response while the thieves were still inside the vault. Even if the thieves escaped, earlier detection would have given them less time to loot boxes, potentially reducing losses. The question was why Sparkasse hadn't implemented such measures. Several explanations seemed possible. Cost. Advanced security systems are expensive to install and maintain. The bank may have decided that the cost wasn't justified by the perceived risk level.
Complacency.
Germany's low crime rates and the Ruhr region's particular history without major bank heists may have
created false confidence that such elaborate security wasn't necessary.
Regulatory gaps. German banking regulations may not have required specific security standards for safe deposit box vaults,
leaving banks to make their own determinations about adequate security.
Outdated assessments. Security standards appropriate when the building was designed 20+ years ago may have been inadequate for modern criminal capabilities but hadn't been updated. Whatever the explanation, the result was clear. The security was inadequate, and victims paid the price. The holiday vulnerability. The Christmas holiday timing highlighted another systemic vulnerability: reduced vigilance.
During extended holiday closures,
While the bank saved on staffing costs by closing for several days, this created opportunities for criminals who understood that buildings left empty for days offered ideal conditions for time-intensive crimes.
Security experts noted that holiday periods, Christmas, Easter,
summer vacation periods represented elevated risk times that should trigger enhanced rather than reduced security measures. Options could include increased security guard patrols during closures, remote monitoring systems with 24/7 observation,
automated systems that would alert security companies if unusual activity was detected,
and regular check-ins by security personnel or police even during closures. The cost-benefit calculation was stark. Sparkasse probably saved a few €1,000 by not staffing the
building during the Christmas closure.
The heist would cost the bank and its insurers tens or hundreds of millions of euros in losses and claims. Even a fraction of those losses invested in security would have provided enormous returns. The alarm system failure, perhaps the most troubling question, was why the alarm system didn't activate until 3:58 a.m. Monday morning, apparently after the thieves had already departed.
Several possibilities existed. Delayed trigger.
The alarm might have been triggered by some final action the thieves took as they left, perhaps opening a door that they had previously bypassed, or perhaps a time-delayed fire alarm activated by equipment heat or other factors. System limitations. The alarm system may not have covered the vault basement where the drilling occurred. Many older alarm systems focused on entry points, doors, windows, ground-level access rather than interior spaces like basement vaults that seem secure. Deliberate disabling. The thieves might have disabled alarm systems, though this would typically require either hacking into the system, difficult with modern encrypted systems, or physically cutting wiring,
which usually triggers its own alarms.
Sensor gaps. Motion sensors, glass break detectors, and door contacts, typical alarm system components, might not have detected drilling through concrete walls. The thieves never entered through a monitored access point. They created their own entrance through an unmonitored surface. The investigation was examining alarm system logs to determine exactly what happened. Had alarms been triggered but not properly monitored? Had the system failed technologically? Or was the system simply not designed to detect the type of intrusion the thieves employed?
Safe deposit box vulnerabilities.
The ease with which the thieves apparently forced open 95% of 3,300 safe deposit boxes raised questions about the boxes themselves. Traditional safe deposit boxes use relatively simple lock mechanisms, typically dual key systems where both bank and customer keys are required for access. These lock systems were designed for legitimate access control, not for serious physical attack. Someone with power tools, time, and determination could force open such boxes. The thieves demonstrated this by opening thousands of boxes in about 46 hours, an average of roughly one box per minute, though the actual rate likely varied with box sizes and lock types. More secure alternatives existed but were rarely used in standard banking applications. Options included electronic locks with multi-factor authentication, biometric access controls that would be useless to thieves even if they breached the vault, individual alarm systems for each box that would trigger if forced open, and time delay, locks that couldn't be opened even with proper credentials outside of permitted time windows. However, such advanced security measures were expensive and complicated. They would significantly increase the cost of safe deposit box services, potentially pricing out many customers. They might require more complex customer procedures that would reduce convenience. And they still might not prevent theft by determined criminals who could simply cut through the boxes rather than defeating the locks.
The fundamental problem was that safe deposit boxes were designed for an era when physical bank security seemed sufficient.
Banks operated in buildings with guards, alarms, and heavy vault doors. The boxes themselves only needed to provide modest additional security against opportunistic theft or unauthorized access
by other customers.
The Gelsenkirchen heist demonstrated that this security model was obsolete.
Once criminals breached the vault perimeter, something modern technology and unlimited time made possible, the boxes themselves offered minimal protection. Industry-wide implications. The heist had implications far beyond Sparkasse Gelsenkirchen. Banking industry associations, security consultants,
And regulators across Germany and Europe were examining whether similar vulnerabilities existed at other institutions. How many other bank branches had vaults adjacent to parking garages or other semi-public spaces? How many relied on concrete walls as primary security without adequate detection systems? How many had outdated security designs that hadn't been updated for modern criminal capabilities? Initial surveys suggested that similar vulnerabilities existed at numerous institutions across Germany. The specific configuration vault adjacent to parking garage, inadequate wall monitoring, holiday closure creating time windows might be unusual. But individual elements of this vulnerability pattern were common. The banking industry faced difficult decisions. Updating security systems across thousands of branches would cost billions of euros. Those costs would ultimately be passed to customers through fees or reduced services. But not updating security risked additional heists, with potentially catastrophic consequences for public trust in banking institutions. Insurance companies were also reconsidering their exposure. Safe deposit box insurance was typically a minor, low-risk product line. The €10,300 standard coverage meant even total losses on all boxes at a medium-sized branch wouldn't threaten insurers' financial stability. But Gelsenkirchen demonstrated that actual losses could be 10 or 20 times the insured amounts. If victims succeeded in legal claims arguing that standard coverage was inadequate, insurers could face massive unexpected liabilities. Some insurers began revising policies, increasing premiums for safe deposit box coverage, adding exclusions for certain types of losses, or capping total exposure per institution. This would make insurance more expensive for banks and potentially reduce the coverage available to customers. Regulatory bodies were examining whether current banking regulations adequately addressed safe deposit box security. Some jurisdictions had specific security requirements for vaults and safe deposit facilities. Others left security determinations largely to individual institutions. The Gelsenkirchen case might prompt new regulations, requiring specific security measures, regular security audits, or higher insurance requirements. Chapter 9. The investigation continues. Forensic breakthroughs. Weeks after the heist, forensic analysis continued. The chemical treatment of the vault had complicated evidence collection, but investigators were finding some materials that survived the treatment. Tool mark analysis. Forensic engineers examined marks left on 4 safe deposit boxes. Different tools leave different signatures. The pattern and characteristics of these marks could potentially identify the specific tool models used, which could be traced to purchases or rentals. Concrete analysis. The drilled concrete cores provided information about the drilling process, the bit type, drilling parameters, and operator technique. While this might not directly identify perpetrators, it could help narrow suspect pools to individuals with professional drilling experience. Chemical identification. Laboratories completed analysis of the unknown chemical used to destroy evidence. The chemical's composition, manufacturing process, and distribution channels might provide investigative leads. If it was an unusual or controlled substance, purchases might be traceable. Microscopic evidence. Even after chemical treatment, some microscopic evidence remained. Forensic teams used advanced techniques to recover and analyze trace materials, fibers from clothing, microscopic tool particles, or other traces that survived the chemical exposure. Video enhancement. Forensic video specialists applied sophisticated enhancement techniques to security footage. While the thieves wore masks, gait analysis, body measurements, and behavioral patterns visible in the video might help identify them if suspects were eventually developed through other means. Following the money and gold, the financial investigation focused on trying to trace proceeds from the heist. While gold jewelry and cash were difficult to track directly, the scale of the theft meant that converting stolen goods to usable wealth would create detectable patterns. Investigators monitored gold markets throughout Germany and Europe. A sudden surge in gold sales in particular areas, multiple individuals selling significant quantities of gold jewelry, or patterns suggesting organized fencing operations could all provide leads. They worked with pawn shops, gold buyers, and jewelry dealers, providing descriptions of potentially stolen items and watching for suspicious transactions. Cash laundering also left traces. While small amounts could be spent without detection,
Laundering millions of euros required either many small transactions or connections to money laundering operations. Banks' anti-money laundering systems flagged unusual cash deposits. Tax authorities watched for individuals suddenly displaying wealth inconsistent with their reported income. International cooperation was crucial. If stolen goods were moved across borders, perhaps gold jewelry sent to Turkey for melting down, or cash deposited in Swiss banks, German investigators needed partners in other countries to trace these movements. Europol's coordination became increasingly important. Intelligence about the heist was shared with law enforcement agencies throughout Europe. Alerts about potentially stolen gold went to every member state. Patterns in gold sales or suspicious financial transactions anywhere in Europe might connect back to Gelsenkirchen. Surveillance and intelligence. Beyond forensic evidence and financial tracking, investigators employ traditional intelligence gathering techniques. Informants within criminal networks might provide tips. Surveillance of known fences or criminal gang members might reveal connections to the heist. Intercepted communications, phone taps, email monitoring, encrypted messaging might contain discussions about the crime. German law allowed various forms of surveillance for serious crimes, though with judicial oversight and privacy protections. Investigators could obtain warrants for phone taps, could monitor suspects' communications, could conduct physical surveillance, and could even deploy undercover agents or informants in some circumstances. The challenge was identifying suspects to surveil. Without clear leads pointing to specific individuals or groups, investigators couldn't simply start monitoring everyone with construction backgrounds or criminal records. They needed something more specific, concrete evidence linking individuals to the crime. This was where the insider information theory became important. If the investigation could identify someone with access to bank information who might have provided intelligence to the thieves, that person could lead to the actual perpetrators. Even if the insider wasn't criminally charged, perhaps they provided information. Unknowingly or through carelessness rather than deliberate conspiracy, they might provide crucial leads. The international dimension. Given the sophistication and potential organized crime connections, investigators increasingly focused on international aspects. Several scenarios seemed possible. Cross-border criminals. The perpetrators might be based in another country, having traveled to Germany specifically for the heist before returning home. This would explain why German databases hadn't produced obvious suspects and why the thieves seemed to vanish after the crime. Criminal tourism. Organized crime groups sometimes engaged in criminal tourism, traveling to other countries to commit crimes before returning home where they were less vulnerable to law enforcement. Eastern European groups committing crimes in Western Europe exemplified this pattern. International networks. Even if some perpetrators were based in Germany, they might have connections to international criminal networks that provided planning assistance, equipment, or channels for disposing of stolen goods. Interpol issued notices about the heist, alerting law enforcement agencies worldwide. If suspects traveled internationally, they might be flagged by border security systems. If they attempted to sell stolen goods in other countries, alerts might trigger investigations. However, international investigations faced challenges. Different countries had different laws, different procedures, and different priorities. A German investigation might seem urgent to German police, but be one of many cases competing for attention in other jurisdictions. Language barriers, cultural differences, and legal complexities could slow cooperation. The European Union's common law enforcement area theoretically facilitated cross-border investigations within Europe. EU member states had agreements for mutual legal assistance, shared criminal databases, and relatively streamlined extradition procedures. But even within the EU, practical cooperation took time and effort. Outside the EU, cooperation became more complex. Countries like Switzerland, with strict banking secrecy laws, might be less cooperative with financial investigations. Countries with political tensions with Germany might be slow to respond to requests. Some countries' law enforcement capabilities were simply limited, making effective cooperation difficult even with goodwill. The publicity strategy police faced strategic decisions about how much information to release publicly. Releasing details about the investigation could generate helpful tips from the public. It could also alert perpetrators to investigative progress, allowing them to adjust their behavior or flee.
The decision to release security footage showing the oddly masked individuals was calculated. Police hoped someone might recognize the individuals from their builds, mannerisms, or clothing despite the masks. They wanted the public to know that video evidence existed, potentially pressuring perpetrators or creating conflicts within criminal groups. However, police held back many details. The specific technical evidence being analyzed, the full extent of forensic findings, and the directions that investigations were taking remained confidential. This preserved investigative advantages and prevented perpetrators from knowing what evidence existed against them. Media management was also important. The heist had generated enormous public interest, with constant media
Coverage and speculation.
Police needed to maintain public confidence in the investigation while not compromising it through premature disclosures. They provided regular updates without revealing too much, walked a line between transparency and operational security. The ethnic dimension of victims made media relations particularly sensitive.
Police stressed that the
investigation focused on catching criminals regardless of victims' backgrounds, that all victims deserve justice equally, and that the concentration of immigrant victims didn't affect investigative priorities. Whether these messages resonated with affected communities was another question. Chapter 10. Comparative Cases and Criminal Precedents, the Hatton Garden Heist 2015. The most obvious comparison was to the Hatton Garden safe deposit facility burglary in London.
Easter 2015. That heist shared remarkable similarities with Gelsenkirchen.
Method. Thieves drilled through a concrete wall to access a vault containing safe deposit boxes.
Timing. The crime occurred over Easter weekend, when businesses were closed for an extended holiday.
Perpetrators. A gang of predominantly elderly career criminals, with ages ranging from 48 to 76 years old.
Haul.
Approximately £14 million, about 16 million euros at the time,
though the full value was never determined as many victims didn't report their losses. The Hatton Garden gang is eventually caught through a combination of police work and their own mistakes.
They were captured on security cameras, left DNA evidence at the scene, and foolishly discussed the heist in a pub that police had bugged.
By June 2015, just 2 months after the heist, most gang members were arrested.
The case demonstrated both the possibility of sophisticated drilling heists and the reality that even experienced criminals make mistakes that lead to their capture.
The gang members received prison sentences ranging from 6 to 7 years. However,
Gelsenkirchen appeared more sophisticated in several ways. The thieves seemed more forensically aware. Chemical treatment, possible portable toilet. They avoided obvious mistakes like discussing the crime in locations where they could be recorded. And as of early January 2026, they remained at large despite extensive investigation. The Antwerp Diamond Heist, 2003. Another famous comparison was the heist of the century at the Antwerp World Diamond Center in February 2003. Thieves stole an estimated $100 million worth of diamonds, gold, and jewelry from Vault D, one of the most secure facilities in the diamond trade. That heist involved sophisticated defeat of multiple security systems, motion sensors, video surveillance, magnetic alarms, and a vault door. The perpetrators, led by Italian Leonardo Notarbartolo, spent months preparing, studying security systems and developing methods to defeat them.
However, the thieves made crucial mistakes.
They left behind a partially eaten sandwich with DNA evidence. Notarbartolo carelessly discarded incriminating evidence in an area where police eventually found it. The gang was caught, tried, and convicted, with Notarbartolo receiving a 10-year sentence. The Antwerp heist demonstrated that even the most secure facilities could be breached by determined, sophisticated criminals. It also showed that forensic evidence and investigative persistence could ultimately bring perpetrators to justice even when the crime itself seemed nearly perfect. The Baker Street Robbery, 1971. A historical precedent from England was the famous Baker Street Robbery of September 1971, where thieves In 1995, thieves tunneled into a bank vault in Berlin Steglitz, making off with millions of Deutschmarks from safe deposit boxes. The sophisticated tunnel required engineering expertise and months of preparation. Some suspects were eventually identified and arrested, though not all stolen goods were recovered. These historical cases provided investigators with both precedents and cautionary tales. They showed patterns in how sophisticated heists were executed, which could provide investigative leads. They also showed that solving such crimes often took years, required persistence and luck, and didn't always result in full recovery of stolen goods. Chapter 11: The Social and Cultural Context. Immigration and wealth. The concentration of Turkish and Arab victims highlighted broader social and cultural issues in German society.
Why did immigrant communities rely so heavily on physical gold and cash storage?
Several factors contributed. Cultural traditions. In many Middle Eastern and Turkish cultures,
Gold jewelry represented traditional wealth. Storage.
gold was portable, universally valuable, and could be liquidated if necessary. Family jewelry passed through generations represented both financial security and cultural continuity. Historical experience. Many immigrant families came from countries that had experienced economic instability, currency devaluations, or political upheaval.
These experiences created distrust of paper money and electronic financial systems.
Gold and hard assets seemed more reliable. Banking access. First-generation immigrants sometimes faced challenges accessing traditional banking services.
Language barriers, lack of credit history, or unfamiliarity with German financial systems meant that physical wealth storage seemed simpler and more trustworthy. Tax concerns. While most victims insisted their wealth was legitimate and properly reported,
some observers speculated that cash and gold storage might reflect attempts to avoid tax reporting requirements.
This suggestion was controversial and vigorously disputed by victim advocates who noted it
amounted to blaming victims for their losses. Family networks. In cultures with strong extended family networks, gold jewelry and cash could be easily shared or transferred between family members without complex legal or financial procedures.
Understanding these cultural patterns was important for both the investigation and the aftermath. If authorities wanted to recover stolen goods being sold through particular channels, they needed to understand which channels immigrant communities might use.
If policymakers wanted to prevent similar crimes, they needed to understand why certain populations concentrated wealth in vulnerable ways. Trust in institutions. The heist struck at fundamental questions about trust in German institutions. Germany's reputation for order, efficiency, and rule of law was a source of national pride and an important factor in the country's prosperity. That reputation rested on the assumption that German institutions, banks, police, courts function reliably and could be trusted to protect people's interests. For immigrant communities, trust in German institutions was particularly significant.
Many immigrants had come from countries where government corruption was common, where police couldn't be relied upon, and where banks sometimes collapsed, taking depositors' savings with them.
Germany represented an alternative, a country where institutions worked, where rules were followed, and where savings would be safe.
The Sparkasse Gelsenkirchen heist challenged that narrative.
If a major public bank couldn't adequately secure safe deposit boxes, what could be trusted? If sophisticated criminals could spend days drilling through concrete walls in public buildings without detection, how safe was anything?
Victim responses reflected this broader crisis of confidence.
Many expressed not just anger about their specific
here believing Germany was different, that rules mattered here, that we would be protected.
Now I don't know what to believe. This crisis of trust extended beyond the immediate victims. Throughout immigrant communities in Germany,
the heist prompted discussions about whether German institutions could truly be relied upon.
Some argued for returning to older patterns, keeping valuables at home, relying on family networks rather than institutional protections. Others argued that the solution was better institutions, not abandonment of institutional trust, but that required Germany to demonstrate it could prevent such crimes and deliver justice to victims. Media narratives and stereotypes. Media coverage of the heist sometimes reflected uncomfortable stereotypes about immigrant communities. Some reporting emphasized the amount of gold and cash involved, with undertones suggesting this wealth was somehow suspicious or undeserved. Headlines like "Millions in Immigrant Gold Stolen" could be read as factual descriptions or as subtle othering of the victims. Coverage of victims' difficulties providing documentation for their losses sometimes carried implications that the focus on tax questions, even when quickly dismissed by authorities, fed narratives that immigrant wealth was somehow illegitimate. Victim advocates pushed back against these narratives, emphasizing that the victims were hardworking people who had saved legitimately, that storing gold was a cultural tradition, not a sign of criminality, and that the inability to provide decades-old receipts was perfectly understandable and shouldn't delegitimize their claims. Security changes. The heist would likely prompt security improvements at banks across Germany and potentially Europe. Specific changes might include enhanced wall protection. Banks with vaults adjacent to parking garages or other semi-public spaces would need to improve protection. This could mean thicker walls with additional reinforcement, multiple wall layers, separated by monitored spaces, or relocating vaults to more secure locations. Advanced monitoring. Vibration sensors, acoustic monitoring, and video surveillance focused on vault perimeters could detect drilling attempts in progress. While such systems added costs, they seemed cheap compared to the potential losses from successful heists. Holiday security. Extended closures during holidays would require enhanced security measures rather than reduced vigilance. This might mean security guard presence even during closures, remote monitoring systems, or automated systems that would alert authorities to unusual activity. Safe deposit box alternatives. Some banks might conclude that traditional safe deposit boxes were becoming too risky and expensive to offer. Alternative services using more secure technologies or simply discontinuing the service entirely might become more common.
Higher insurance. Coverage limits for safe deposit boxes would likely increase,
reflecting the reality that customers often stored more valuable items than historical assumptions suggested.
This would make insurance
more expensive but also more meaningful when losses occurred. These changes would come at a cost, ultimately passed to customers through fees and charges. But after Gelsenkirchen, the cost of not implementing stronger security seemed even higher. Regulatory response. Banking regulators were examining whether new rules were needed.
Possible regulatory changes included
mandatory security standards, specific requirements for vault security,
including wall thickness, monitoring systems, and access controls.
Regular security audits, independent audits of bank security systems to identify vulnerabilities before criminals could exploit them.
Insurance requirements,
minimum insurance coverage for safe deposit boxes, ensuring victims wouldn't face
catastrophic uninsured losses.
Disclosure requirements. Banks would have to clearly inform customers about security measures and insurance limitations,
ensuring customers made informed decisions about what to store in safe deposit boxes.
Incident reporting. Mandatory reporting of security incidents to regulators,
allowing patterns to be identified and addressed industry-wide.
However, regulation faced the perpetual challenge of closing barn doors after horses had escaped. New rules would address the vulnerabilities exploited in Gelsenkirchen, but creative criminals would identify new vulnerabilities to exploit.
Security was an arms race without final victory, only ongoing effort to stay ahead of evolving threats. An unfinished story.
As this story is written in early January 2026, the Gelsenkirchen heist remains an active investigation with no arrests announced.
Thousands of victims await word on whether their stolen valuables might be recovered,
whether perpetrators will be caught, and what compensation they might receive.
The investigation continues with hundreds of officers pursuing leads,
analyzing evidence, and coordinating with international partners.
Forensic analysis proceeds, with each new finding potentially providing crucial breakthroughs.
Financial investigators track patterns in gold sales and suspicious transactions.
Intelligence operations monitor criminal networks for any connections to the heist. But the clock is ticking.
With each passing day, the trail grows colder. Stolen goods are fenced and dispersed.
Perpetrators establish distance from the crime. Evidence degrades. The window for a quick resolution is closing. For victims, the waiting is agonizing. Financial hardship compounds emotional trauma. The inability to plan for
The future, not knowing what compensation might come or when, creates additional stress. Some victims express anger not just at the thieves, but at the slow pace of investigation and the complexity of insurance claims.
The bank faces its own challenges.
Reputational damage from the heist will take years to repair.
Legal liability.
From victim lawsuits could cost tens or hundreds of millions of euros. The Boer branch, still closed as of this writing, may never reopen in its current form.
Management changes are likely, and painful questions about institutional failures will persist.
The broader community in Gelsenkirchen grapples with the heist's aftermath.
The crime drew unflattering attention to the city, reinforcing stereotypes about the Ruhr region's economic struggles and social challenges.
Turkish and Arab communities process the specific targeting they experienced and its implications for their place in German society. The political and policy implications are still unfolding. What security changes will banks implement?
What new regulations will emerge?
How will law enforcement evolve to address sophisticated organized crime? These questions will be debated and answered over coming months and years. The story of the Gelsenkirchen heist is ultimately a very human story.
It's about families whose life savings vanished in a weekend. It's about criminals who believed they had found the perfect crime.
It's about investigators working tirelessly to bring those criminals to justice.
It's about a community trying to rebuild trust after a devastating betrayal. The ethnic dimension of the heist created a minefield for journalists trying to
report the story accurately without reinforcing stereotypes or blaming victims.
Some media outlets handled this well,
focusing on the crime and the investigation while being respectful to victims. Others were less careful, allowing stereotypes and assumptions to color their coverage.
This wasn't unique to the Gelsenkirchen heist.
Similar issues arose whenever crimes disproportionately affected immigrant communities.
The challenge was reporting relevant facts,
the cultural context that made certain communities attractive targets, the specific vulnerabilities that enabled the crime without reinforcing prejudices or blaming victims for their victimization. Political implications. The heist occurred in a political context where immigration was already a contentious issue in German politics. Various political parties had different perspectives on immigration, integration, and multiculturalism. The heist became, inevitably, a political football. Some politicians emphasized the crime as evidence of the need for better security and law enforcement resources. They argued that sophisticated criminal networks, whether domestic or international, pose serious threats that required robust police responses and modern investigative tools. Others focused on the failure of German institutions to protect vulnerable populations. They argued that the heist demonstrated that immigrant communities were underserved by security systems designed primarily with ethnic German populations in mind, that cultural differences in wealth storage hadn't been adequately considered in bank security planning. Still others saw the heist through a law and order lens, arguing it demonstrated the need for tougher sentences for property crimes, better border security to prevent international criminal networks from operating in Germany, or enhanced surveillance powers for police. The far right seized on the heist to promote anti-immigrant narratives, suggesting that immigrant communities attracted crime, that cultural differences created security vulnerabilities, or that Germany would be safer without significant immigrant populations. These arguments were rejected by mainstream politicians and victim advocates as both factually wrong and morally repugnant. The victims
were the innocent parties here, not the cause of the crime.
Local politicians in Gelsenkirchen faced particular pressure. The city government owned Sparkasse Gelsenkirchen and therefore bore ultimate responsibility for the bank's operations. Opposition politicians demanded accountability, asking why security vulnerabilities hadn't been identified and addressed,
why oversight of the bank hadn't been more rigorous.
City officials defended themselves by noting that banking security was the responsibility of professional management, that political oversight focused on financial performance and community service rather than operational details, and that no one could have anticipated such a sophisticated crime. But these defenses rang somewhat hollow to victims whose life savings had been stolen from a publicly owned institution.
Chapter 12. Looking forward. Can they be caught?
As January 2026 progressed, the investigation continued with no arrests announced. This raised the question, would the perpetrators ever be caught?
Historical precedents suggested mixed outcomes. Some sophisticated heists were eventually solved, with perpetrators caught and prosecuted. Others remained unsolved for years or decades, with criminals escaping justice and stolen goods never recovered. Several factors would determine the outcome. Evidence quality. If forensic analysis produced strong evidence, DNA,
Fingerprints, distinctive tool marks, that could be matched to suspects, arrests might follow quickly.
but if evidence was limited or degraded by the chemical treatment, identification would be much harder.
Inside information. If investigators could identify and pressure an insider who provided information to the
thieves, that person might lead to the perpetrators. Similarly, if conflicts within the criminal gang led to someone talking, breakthroughs could occur.
mistakes. Most criminals eventually make mistakes. They might contact someone under surveillance, spend money in ways that attract attention,
or return to normal life, leaving traces that connect them to the crime.
Patient investigators watching for such mistakes might eventually catch perpetrators years after the crime.
International cooperation. If the thieves were international criminals, catching them would require effective cooperation between agencies across borders. This was possible but difficult and time-consuming. Pure luck. Sometimes cases were solved through sheer chance, a traffic stop that led to discovery of stolen
goods, an unrelated investigation that uncovered connections to the heist, or a tip from someone with no apparent connection to the crime. The probability of solving the case decreased with time. Stolen goods would be fenced and dispersed. Perpetrators would establish alibis and distance themselves from the crime. Evidence would degrade.
Witnesses' memories would fade.
But even years later, breakthroughs remained possible if investigators persisted. Recovering the stolen goods, even if perpetrators were caught and prosecuted, recovering stolen goods would be enormously challenging.
Gold jewelry could be melted down, destroying any identifying characteristics.
Cash could be spent or laundered through complex financial networks.
Items with primarily sentimental value, family heirlooms,
personal documents, photographs might simply be destroyed by thieves who saw no value in them. The best hope for recovery was catching perpetrators quickly, before they had time to fully dispose of stolen goods.
But weeks had passed, and likely most items were already sold, melted, or otherwise beyond recovery.
The best hope for recovery was catching perpetrators quickly, before they had time to fully dispose of stolen goods.
But weeks had passed, and likely most items were already sold, melted, or otherwise beyond recovery. Insurance payouts would provide some financial compensation to victims, though likely not full compensation given coverage limitations. But insurance couldn't replace items with sentimental value. No amount of money could truly compensate for the loss of a grandmother's wedding ring or a deceased parent, treasured possession. Victims would have to rebuild their financial security as best they could.
For younger victims with working years ahead, this was possible if difficult.
For elderly victims who had spent decades accumulating their wealth, full recovery might be impossible. It's also a cautionary tale about the vulnerabilities in our complex modern world. We rely on institutions to protect us, banks to safeguard our wealth, police to catch criminals, laws to deliver justice. The Gelsenkirchen heist revealed how fragile that protection could be, how even trusted institutions in orderly societies could fail catastrophically.
But the story also reveals human resilience. Victims are organizing, supporting each other, and fighting for justice and compensation.
Investigators persist despite challenges, applying skill and dedication to a difficult case.
Communities come together to help those affected.
German society, for all its imperfections, mobilizes resources to address the crime and its aftermath. The ending of this story has yet to be written. Will the perpetrators be caught? Will stolen goods be recovered? Will victims receive adequate compensation?
Will the changes prompted by this heist make future crimes less likely? These questions await answers that may not come from months or years.
What is certain is that the Christmas weekend of 2025, when thieves drilled through a concrete wall and looted thousands of safe deposit boxes,
will be remembered as a watershed moment, a crime that shocked Germany, devastated thousands of families, and raised fundamental questions about security, trust, and justice in the modern world. The investigation continues. The victims wait. And somewhere, the perpetrators of Germany's heist of the century wonder whether they truly got away with it, or whether patient investigators are closing in with each piece of evidence analyzed. Each connection made, each mistake the criminals thought was too small to matter. Only time will tell which ending this story receives. The criminals caught and justice served, or the perfect crime that remained unsolved. A reminder that even in orderly Germany, determined criminals with sophisticated plans could sometimes succeed against all society's protections. Timeline: Sparkasse bank robbery, December 24, 2025, Christmas Eve. Sparkasse branch closes for Christmas holiday. Bank will remain closed through December 26, Boxing Day. December 27, 2025, Friday. Bank reopens briefly in afternoon before closing for weekend. Evening. Thieves likely begin operation, entering parking garage with equipment. Video footage later shows suspicious activity in parking garage area, December 27th to 28th, 2025, Friday night, Saturday. Drilling operation begins. Thieves work through the night, creating holes in concrete wall. Witnesses later report seeing men with large bags in parking garage stairwell. Saturday night, December 28th to 29th, 2025, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Thieves spend approximately 46 hours inside vault. Systematically loot approximately 2,850 safe deposit boxes, 95% of total 3,300 boxes. Spray unknown chemical throughout vault to destroy DNA evidence. Early Monday morning. Thieves depart in black Audi RS6 with stolen license plates. December 29th, 2025, Monday, 3:58 a.m. Fire alarm triggers at Sparkasse branch, approximately 4 a.m. Police and fire services arrive, discover massive hole in vault wall. Morning. Bank officials notified. Begin assessing scope of theft. Police secure crime scene. Begin investigation. Evening. First media reports emerge about major bank heist. December 30th, 2025, Tuesday. Approximately 200 customers gather outside closed branch demanding information. Bank establishes dedicated hotline for affected customers. Police begin processing crime scene, requiring hazmat protocols due to chemical contamination. Initial estimates suggest losses could reach tens of millions of euros. Media coverage intensifies. Story goes national and international. December 31st, 2025, January 1st, 2026. New Year's holiday. Investigation continues through New Year's holiday. Forensic teams analyze evidence from vault. Video footage reviewed, showing at least 4 masked individuals. Black Audi RS6 with stolen plates identified as getaway vehicle. Early January 2026. Victim coordination begins through online platforms. Estimated losses rise to potentially €100 million. 195 victims coordinate claims. Represents substantial portion of affected customers. Class action lawsuit discussions begin. Police release security footage to public. Appeal for information. North Rhine-Westphalia State Criminal Police Office takes over investigation coordination. Branch remains closed indefinitely. Investigation continues with no arrests announced as of this writing. Key figures and organizations. Victims, public spokespersons. Meet, construction worker, lost retirement savings and family gold. Sihat Bostanchi, construction worker. Vocal about security failures. Anonymous female victim. Lost mother's 1988 gold coin and grandmother's bracelets. Approximately 2,700 total customers affected. 2,850 boxes looted. 95% of victims estimated to be of Turkish or Arab origin. Law enforcement. Gelsenkirchen Police Department. Initial response and local investigation. North Rhine-Westphalia State Criminal Police Office, LOCA. Coordinating investigation. Federal Criminal Police Office, BKA. Supporting investigation. Europol. International coordination. Hazmat teams. Chemical cleanup and analysis. Bank officials. Frank Krallman. Sparkasse Gelsenkirchen press spokesman. Sparkasse Gelsenkirchen management. Names not publicly released. City of Gelsenkirchen officials. As bank owners. Criminal suspects. At least 4 masked individuals captured on security cameras. Unknown number of additional accomplices possible insider with access to architectural plans and customer information. No arrests announced as of early January 2026. Technical security experts. Various security consultants providing media analysis. Forensic engineers analyzing drilling methods. Banking security experts reviewing industry vulnerabilities. Technical details. The vault breach. Wall thickness 40 to 45 centimeters, reinforced concrete with steel rebar. Drilling method: industrial diamond core drill bits. Number of holes: at least 2 large overlapping holes. Estimated drilling time: 4 to 8 hours total. Noise level: approximately 100 decibels. Equivalent to motorcycle. Equipment required: 20 kilograms drilling machine, water cooling system. Power source: final opening size large enough for adults to walk through. Carrying bags. The equipment: industrial diamond core drilling machine, approximately 20 kilograms. Multiple diamond coated drill bits, hundreds to thousands of euros each. Water cooling system: hundreds of liters of water. Pumps and hoses for water circulation. Power source: portable generator or building electrical system. Tools for forcing safe deposit boxes, angle grinders, crowbars, etc. Large bags for transporting stolen goods. Possibly portable chemical toilet. Unknown chemical for destroying. DNA evidence. Protective equipment, masks, gloves, clothing. Safe deposit box details. Total boxes: 3,300. Boxes looted: approximately 2,850, 95%. License plates: stolen in Hanover weeks before heist, 200 kilometers away. Performance: 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in under 4 seconds. Top speed 300 plus kilometer per hour. Last seen leaving parking garage early Monday morning. Direction: toward A2 Autobahn. Current location: unknown. Chemical treatment: unknown chemicals sprayed throughout vault. Purpose: destroy DNA and biological evidence. Required hazmat protocols for cleanup. Toxic fumes requiring protective equipment. Delayed full forensic processing of crime scenes. Specific chemical composition still under laboratory analysis. Appendix D. Financial impact. Direct losses. Estimated total stolen: 100 euros plus million. Based on victim reports. Standard insurance coverage: 10,300 euros per box times 2,850 boxes equals tilde. Euro 29.3 million maximum. Insurance shortfall: potentially 70 euros plus million. Lost business: Boer branch closure, customer loss. Reputational damage: insurance premiums. Industry-wide increases for safe deposit box coverage. Economic context: Gelsenkirchen unemployment, one of highest rates in Germany. City population: approximately 260,000. Ruhr region: historically industrial. Experienced decades of economic decline. Local economy: theft represents substantial percentage of local wealth. Immigrant communities: often operating cash-based businesses. Accumulating gold as savings. Immigrant communities: often operating cash-based businesses. Accumulating gold as savings. Security lessons and recommendations. What failed? 1. Inadequate physical barriers to 45 centimeters. Concrete wall insufficient against modern drilling technology. 2. No detection systems, no vibration sensors. Acoustic monitoring, or structural integrity sensors on vault walls. 3. Holiday vulnerability. Extended closure created multi-day window for undisturbed work. 4. Delayed alarm response. Fire alarm didn't trigger until thieves had departed. 5. Parking garage access. Public access to area adjacent to high security vault. 6. Insufficient surveillance.
Camera coverage had blind spots. Didn't cover all critical areas. 7. Safe deposit box security. Individual boxes easily defeated by power tools. Recommended improvements: physical security. Multiple wall layers with monitored space between. Increased wall thickness, 60 centimeters. With advanced reinforcement, vault relocation away from public access areas. Hardened safe deposit boxes resistant to power tools detection systems. Vibration sensors on all vault walls. Acoustic monitoring for drilling, cutting sounds. Structural integrity sensors, motion detection in parking areas near vaults. 24/7 video surveillance with no blind spots. Operational security. Mandatory security checks during extended closures. Security guard presence or remote monitoring during holidays. Regular security audits by independent experts. Background checks for all personnel with vault access. Strict control of architectural plans and security documentation. Insurance and disclosure. Higher coverage limits reflecting actual customer usage. Clear disclosure of insurance limitations. Requirements for customers to document valuable contents. Optional supplemental coverage for high-value items. Response protocols. Immediate police notification for any vault area alarms. Rapid response teams for extended closure security incidents. Coordination with local police for holiday period monitoring. Industry-wide implications. All banks with safe deposit facilities should conduct security audits. Regulatory standards may need updating for modern criminal capabilities. Insurance industry needs to reassess risk models for safe deposit box coverage. Architectural standards for new bank construction should incorporate lessons learned. International cooperation needed as organized crime crosses borders. Appendix F. Psychological and social impact: victim trauma, financial devastation, life savings and retirement security lost, emotional loss, irreplaceable family heirlooms and sentimental items stolen, trust betrayal, belief in institutional security shattered, cultural violation, generational wealth and family history stolen, stress and anxiety, uncertainty about compensation and future security, relationship strain, family conflicts over financial losses, mental health, symptoms similar to PTSD, depression, persistent anxiety. Community impact: Turkish and Arab communities, specific targeting. Raised questions about discrimination, crisis of confidence, questioning whether German institutions can be trusted, social cohesion, both community solidarity and tensions with broader society, political implications, heist becoming politicized in immigration debates, media representation, concerns about stereotyping and victim blaming, institutional impact, Sparkasse reputation, public confidence in Sparkasse system, damaged banking industry, all banks reviewing safe deposit box security and liability, law enforcement, pressure to solve high-profile case and prevent future incidents, City of Gelsenkirchen, embarrassment and questions about oversight of city-owned bank national identity, challenge to image of order, efficiency, and rule of law. Comparative analysis, similar heists in history. Hatton Garden, 2015. London, £14 million stolen drilling through concrete wall. Easter weekend timing. Elderly criminal gang, most perpetrators caught and convicted. Antwerp Diamond Center, 2003. Belgium, $100 million stolen. Sophisticated security defeat. Leonardo Notre Bartolo gang, forensic evidence led to convictions. Baker Street robbery, 1971, London, £3 million stolen, £40 million plus today. Tunneling into vault, most perpetrators never caught. Inspired films and books. Berlin bank heists, various. Multiple tunneling drilling heists over decades. Mixed success in catching perpetrators. Demonstrated ongoing vulnerability of vault facilities. Conclusion. The unfinished chapter. The Gelsenkirchen heist of Christmas 2025 stands as one of the most audacious and professionally executed bank robberies in modern European history. The thieves' sophisticated planning, technical expertise, and forensic awareness allowed them to spend 2 days systematically looting a bank vault in the heart of a German city without detection. But the story is far from over. As investigators continue their work, as victims organize and pursue compensation,
And as the banking industry grapples with security implications, multiple narratives are unfolding simultaneously. For the victims, this is a story of devastating loss and the struggle for justice.
For investigators, it's a complex puzzle requiring patience, skill, and international cooperation.
For the banking industry, it's a wake-up call about security vulnerabilities. For German society, it raises questions about institutional trust, immigrant integration, and the balance between privacy and security. The ultimate outcome remains uncertain. Will the perpetrators be caught?
Will victims receive adequate compensation?
Will this heist prompt meaningful security improvements that prevent future crimes? These questions await answers that may not come for months or years. What is certain is that the Crristmas 2025 heist will be remembered as a watershed moment, a crime that exposed vulnerabilities
in systems that seemed secure, devastated thousands of families who trusted German institutions to protect their wealth, and demonstrated that even in orderly, law-abiding Germany, sophisticated criminals could execute spectacular crimes with apparent impunity.
The investigation continues. The victims wait. And somewhere, the perpetrators who pulled off Germany's heist of the century wonder whether their perfect crime will remain unsolved, or whether patient investigators are slowly building the case that will bring them to justice. Time will tell which ending this remarkable story receives. If you liked the report and you're curious about more real criminal cases happening in the
world and want to see more interesting documentary about police operation,
hit like and subscribe for our channel to stay tuned for new video we are posting every week. Stay safe, peace,